separate guide. And for now, I'm just going to go through every legendary, explain whether this card is good, whether you should keep it if you open it, um, if you may want to disenchant it, and that kind of thing. Surprisingly, I think there are a lot of cards that are, you know, pretty good, and they don't get mentioned on a lot of the lists, but you may still want to keep it if you open it, especially if you're, if you're fine with like grinding up the dust or whatever to get that last legendary you need. Okay, so I'm just going to go through in order. First one is Blood Mage Thalnos. This card is great. You definitely should not get rid of it if you open it. Um, it's good in pretty much all the classes that use spell power, so like Shaman, Druid, Mage, that kind of thing. It's great, like just because you can get a surprise spell power. Like let's hypothetically you're playing a Druid, and on turn 6 you can play this and then use a swipe and do 2 damage to everything instead of 1, and it's kind of surprising to them. Also, in really bad spots where you just have a bad draw or whatever, it can smooth out your draw by the fact it draws a card. So it's much nicer than the alternative of playing the Geomancer. Alright, Lorewhacker Cho. I would say for a new player, if you get this card, you can probably disenchant it. I do think it has some use. If you're playing like some kind of aggro deck and you're in the lead, playing this card can really hurt your opponent because they're going to have to give you they're going to have, like, when you have the win in board position and you play this, they're probably going to have to use spells to get out of that win, and then it's going to give you spells back, so it kind of locks down a win. The thing is, in Hearthstone, like, it's most times when you're winning, it's hard to reverse it anyway, so this card's just kind of irrelevant, I think. I would probably disenchant this and take the 400 dust to make rares or whatever for your deck. Millhouse, Mana Storm, is another card that I would probably disenchant for new players. I do think this card is potentially decent in certain metagames. If you play this versus an aggro Warlock, for example, it's pretty much a 4-4. I mean, they still can Soulfire it, but they would be able to Soulfire it for free regardless. Probably the spells they're running are going to be like Soulfire and Mortal Coil, so giving them free spells doesn't do a whole lot. If you play this versus a warrior, for example, maybe giving them free spells doesn't do a whole lot. Still, though, I was watching a game the other day, and someone played a Millhouse versus a control warrior thinking, okay, well, this is great, and they proceeded to shield block to draw a card for free, and then slam it for free, and then execute it for free, and, I mean, it's like, okay, well, I guess they couldn't have dealt with, just the old 3-3 there. Probably. Well, maybe they may have had 3 mana. But anyways, the point is that oftentimes it just ends up being kind of bad, and so I would just probably go ahead and disenchant this card. Nat Pagle recently was nerfed. I used to have him in sort of the top 5 legendaries. I no longer think he's one of the top 5 legendaries. I do still think he's a good card. I think you can play him in control decks, and basically he's okay. In general, though, he's definitely worse than he used to be, and he's definitely not a must-add anymore, being that they have a whole turn to react to him. There's so many cards that can react to him. I mean, he is an 0-4, but like they can silence him, they can do damage to him. Also, just in general, like half of a draw or 1 draw isn't that bad. So, like, let's say, for example, maybe it takes them 2 turns to deal with him. That still probably wasn't worth it. Really, the best case scenario with this type of card is when you get multiple draws off it. The way it used to work when it was at the end of your turn, it was much more likely you would get a free draw, and then they couldn't kill it a turn, and then you would get another free draw. And I mean, obviously there's only a 25% chance of that, but then those 2 cards might snowball you into winning a game, so you could win a game like maybe 10% of the time just by playing this card. It's not like that anymore. So that being said, you may want to hang on to this card. It's definitely usable in slower decks, like control type decks. So you may not just want to automatically disenchant it. I would probably hang on to it. The next card is King Mukla. King Mukla is definitely an interesting card, and he's primarily played in like board control decks. If you're controlling the board, you don't really care too much about giving your opponent 2 bananas. You get a 5/5 for 3. It's really hard for them to deal with it. It's oftentimes it's terrible if you draw it when you're not winning. Which is one of the reasons why I don't love playing it, because I think in Hearthstone it's actually it's not too hard to win when you're already winning, but it's kind of hard to come from behind. So this card only really lets you win when you're already winning and snowballs a lead. That can be achieved with a lot of cards. I mean, frankly, even just playing a Harvest Golem instead of this is probably not that much worse than it in terms of the amount of pressure it's applying to them. So for a totally new player, I'd probably consider disenchanting this. I mean, it depends on how much dust you have and need and that kind of stuff. This is certainly playable. You know, it's going to see more play than a Millhouse or a Lure Walker, but I still would probably, for a brand new player, I'd probably go ahead and disenchant it and just build up some rares. And I mean, it's the kind of niche card that you can play later on. Tinkmaster was also just nerfed. I believe they nerfed this into the point where you very rarely will want to play it. I would definitely just go ahead and disenchant this now. It's not. It's still probably got some use in some kind of situations, maybe where you're playing, you know, supreme control decks where you're just controlling the board and keeping their whole board clear, and they're only able to play one big minion, and you can respond to their one big minion by playing this. You know, it situationally could still be as good as it used to be. It's just so unlikely that I still probably wouldn't even play it yet. I'm still. There could be some other situations, like maybe if you're playing like Shaman or Paladin and you have a lot of 1/1s, and you can just kind of like play this as always planning on playing it in situations where maybe they have a guy and you have a couple small guys, and so it never really affects you. It's possible it could work okay in certain decks, but I still think it's worth disenchanting for new players. I think Leeroy is the best card in the game. Obviously, Fireball is probably better than Leeroy because it doesn't give them whelps and you can target past taunts, but just in general, I think Leeroy is the most has the most effect on a game. It lets you effectively run a neutral Fireball that any class can run, and it wins games that don't seem winnable otherwise because of only 4 damage, or only 4 mana for 6 damage. This is actually the very first legendary I would recommend crafting to anyone, and therefore if you open it, certainly do not disenchant it. You want to keep that one. Captain Greenskin's an interesting card. I think this card is playable. You play it in a rogue deck. You can think of it as being like a third Azure Drake. It's 5 mana for a 5/4, and it gives the weapon +1/+1, similar to an Azure Drake in that, you know, instead of drawing a card, you're given the weapon +1/+1. In Rogue, if you have a 1/2 weapon and you make it into a 2/3 weapon, that's a pretty strong effect. That being said, personally, I'd rather play Spiteful Smith or an Assassin's Blade or something like that. Even having this card, I don't play it in my Rogue deck, so for a new player, I'd probably go ahead and disenchant it and get 400 dust to build yourself something you want for, you know, a more competitive deck. Elite Tauren Chieftain, this is a really fun card. I don't think it's necessary for constructed in any way. It's more just like if you want to have fun, like it's certainly a fun card. It's got a cool animation, all kinds of cool cards that you both can draw. It's not really a constructed caliber card, so if you open this card and your goal is to just make decks for fun, you probably should keep it. But if you want to actually, you know, play competitively, then I wouldn't bother keeping it. I'd just go ahead and disenchant that one. Harrison Jones. So I've seen some people playing this lately. You know, in theory, it's like a better ooze because you can draw a card, or I mean, most times when you ooze, it's 1 durability. Sometimes you can ooze a Doomhammer, or you could use this on a Doomhammer and draw a bunch of cards. I don't know. Personally, I'm pretty skeptical that this is better than an ooze. It's 5 mana. It only gives you a 5/4. Yeah, you get to draw a card, but it just... it doesn't really seem that it's better than a ooze. So for a new player, I would just go ahead and disenchant it. Who knows? I mean, I could see keeping it. It's okay, but certainly not great. Cairn Bloodhoof is probably one of the best legendaries in the game now, most notably because they did nerf Tinkmaster, and so before, one of the big weaknesses of this card was Tinkmaster, and Tinkmaster is no longer really seeing any play, so this card is almost always just going to be 2/4/5s. I mean, they can silence it, but not everyone runs silence, so if you play this versus a warrior, for example, they're most likely going to have to deal with it twice. Quite a strong card. Definitely don't disenchant it if you get it. I think it's a great constructed card in sort of more mid-range decks. or control decks. It's not a card you want to play in an aggro deck. And the one weakness of it is like in aggressive metagames. Like right now, the metagame's very aggressive. I mean, yesterday I played something like 16 games, and I think probably like 15 of them were versus either aggro warlocks or hunters. Well, Karin sucks versus aggro warlocks and hunters, so you know, you certainly don't need this card, but it's probably one that's worth keeping. Goblin Mechatork is pretty bad. I think you would rather just play a Boulder Fist Ogre, which is a common, instead of this, so you certainly should disenchant that if you open it. I think Hogger's pretty weak. Hogger's the kind of card that in very specific situations it can be good, but for 6 mana, and once again, you're getting a 4/4 and a 2/2. If it stays around and they're not able to kill it, then it's okay, but that rarely happens. Most times they're able to deal with it, so I would probably also disenchant Hogger to try to just start building your rares in your collection as a new player. Illidan is, I think, even worse than Hogger, because at least the Hogger, it makes taunts, which kind of protects it a little bit. This guy, you trot it out there, it's not too hard to kill. It's making 2/1s, doesn't do a whole lot. I really don't think this is a good card at all. I would also disenchant that. Sylvanas is a good card for sure. Sylvanas is also better now with the fact that no one's playing Tinkmaster. Sylvanas is a really strong card. So many times you can play this card and you get in board states where like they're just really awkward for your opponent to deal with. I mean, if they have a board lead and you play this, it's like, you know, they kind of want to kill your guy, but then you're going to take one of their guys. You know, I mean, it's one of these things that really can gum up the board, and that's exactly what you want. So I actually think Sylvanas is maybe better than Karin versus like an aggro warlock, for example. They're going to have a bunch of creatures. They're going to want to try to keep your board clear. You play Sylvanas, then they're going to risk giving you like, you know, one of their cards. So you definitely want to keep that one if you open it. It's a good card. I'm not sure it's quite a top 5 card. I don't know. It could make it, though. It's right on the cusp, if not, as far as legendaries. The Beast is really interesting. I think the Beast is probably something you're going to end up disenchanting if you open. It's really risky, the fact that if they kill it, they give a 3/3. There might be something cool here with like trying to play this and silence it or something. I don't know. It's kind of weird. Or just playing it in, you know, in situations where they can't deal with it. I think there's some potential for it, but it's not been realized yet, and so for now I'd probably just disenchant the Beast in order to get a card for get more cards for your decks. The Black Knight's a great card. I previously used to rate this in the top, you know, like 2 or 3 of all legendaries. I feel like it's worse in the current metagame. It is a metagame card, depending on what's popular, whether the decks are taunt heavy or not. Right now, the most popular decks are not taunt heavy at all. The most popular decks I would say right now are Warlock Aggro, which do have some taunts, but killing a Voidwalker is not the greatest thing in the world. I mean, it's not like it's going to totally swing the game. Hunters don't really have taunts, and Warrior Control decks don't really have taunts either, so those are probably the 3 most popular decks, and I don't feel like the Black Knight's great against any of them. That being said, you probably would keep this card if you opened it. It's a great card. It's probably one of the top 5 legendaries still, in my mind, and it works in a lot of metagames. Right now it may not be great, but who knows, you know. Basically what generally happens in these types of situations is the aggressive cards are really popular, and then everyone plays the taunts to kind of counter that, and then the cards that are good against that become good, which is this. So Baron Geddon is a good legendary, very solid. Do 2 damage to all other characters is very good against aggro decks, so this is a good control deck card. Probably would keep this if you get it. It's a little less played than a lot of the others, but I do think it's a really strong card. I mean, it's a little fragile, and you're paying 7 mana, and it's only 5 health. But the thing is that most times you play this, you're going to get like a nice board wipe, right? You're going to set it up. You're not just going to throw it out there on turn 7 on an empty board. You can do that sometimes, but most times it's going to kill a couple guys with the turn you play it. So worst case scenario, you know, you get like 2 cards or one or 2 cards that you kill of theirs, and then they have to spend another card or 2 to kill it. It's just a huge amount of card advantage, so it's a really good card. It's one that you probably should keep if you open. Um, I'm not sure it cracks the top 5 legendaries, but it's once again it's on the verge. It's definitely a good card. Um, I think Gruul is a pretty fun card, but also one I would probably just disenchant. If I'm spending 8 mana, I would much rather have a Ragnaros or one of the class legendaries, or many other things. I would probably go ahead and disenchant a Gruul to get some rares for now. It's not probably going to be played in any deck that's not just sort of a funsy deck. Ragnaros is amazing. I think Ragnaros is probably one of the top 3 legendaries, maybe second now. After Leroy, it's really good. It's good in most strategies. It's good in board control decks, and it's good in control decks. It's not necessarily great in pure rush decks, but it's a really strong card. You definitely would want to keep this if you open it. Okay, next, Alexstrasza. Alexstrasza is a great card. It's mostly a control deck card. You use it either in a long game where your opponent's still at full life to do a lot of damage, or you use it in a game where you are almost dead and you want to put yourself back up to 15. It's fairly versatile, and it is an 8/8, so it's a good control card. As a new player, I'm sort of on the fence about whether someone should keep this, because you're probably not going to be playing the kind of decks that this is in right away, but eventually as you transition into playing more decks, you would want it. So probably would keep it unless you're really close to that one card you want or something. Disenchanting it wouldn't be the hugest mistake, but I probably would keep it. Malygos is a really fun card, but I don't think it's a very good card. It's a card that, certainly you can do some cool, like random Moonfire or, Soulfires to finish a game. It's more of a fun card than it is a good card, though, so as a new player I'd probably disenchant Malygos just to get some other rares you want, or an epic or something. Nosdormu is terrible, probably one of the worst cards in the game. What I think they should do with this card is make it like 3 mana for a 3/3, then it'd be amazing, because if you want to play like a faster game, like you'd actually play it. As of now, playing this for 9 mana, like every other 9 mana card's far superior, so I think this is an auto disenchant. The only reason I haven't disenchanted it is because there aren't any cards that I need, and I have like 3,300 dust, so I mean, no reason to disenchant it. Maybe I'll play it in an Alarmobot deck or something just for fun. So that's why I still have it. I do think for a new player you should disenchant that one immediately. Onyxia is a good card. It's a little underplayed, but it's pretty strong. The fact that you get to summon a whole bunch of whelps when you play it, and they have to have a way to deal with the whelps, and an 8/8, it's a pretty good card. Certainly more of a control card. I could see arguments either way for keeping or disenchanting. I'd probably disenchant it as a new player, just because it's very niche, and it's probably not going to go in a lot of decks, but if you have a decent collection and you're kind of planning on unlocking everything eventually and stuff, keeping it's not the worst thing either, because it is playable. Ysera's a good strong card. I feel like you should probably keep Ysera. It's probably one of the best cards at winning a game as only one card. It is also 9 mana and not taunt, so you have to be ahead to play it. But if you are ahead and you play it and they can't deal with it, you probably will win. I mean, it's one of the best finishers in the game as far as that goes. It's definitely worth playing and keeping for control decks. I definitely would keep that one if you open it. I actually think Deathwing is a great card. A lot of people don't like Deathwing. I think Deathwing's amazing, especially with the fact that Tinkmaster has gone away now. In a lot of matchups, they just don't really have a good way to deal with a Deathwing. If you play a Deathwing against a Rogue, for example, what can they really do about it? They're going to have to use like 3 or 4 cards to kill it. Control Warrior, I mean, like maybe he has 12 armor and he can shield slam it, or he can execute it or whatever. So it's a little easier for them to deal with, and obviously it can be sheeped and hexed and stuff. But generally you're going to play this in a control deck. You're generally going to play it in situations like, hypothetically, let's say you're playing a Warrior control deck and you have this in your deck, and you're playing versus a Warlock aggro deck, and they throw all their minions out, and then you brawl, and then they throw all their minions out again, and you use your axe and your whatever, and you're killing some minions, and then they throw all their minions out again, and now you've reached 10 mana, and they have like 3 or 4 minions in play and no cards in their hand, and you're at like 15 or whatever. I mean, they're probably at like 20 because they probably tapped 5 times, and then you just play this, and then all of a sudden they're in some real trouble. I mean, there's no answers in their deck to it, and it's really a big game swinger. Another situation that's good is like when you're playing control on control, you get down to those last few cards in the deck, and all I have left is 2 cards, and all he has left is 2 cards. Well, if one of mine's Deathwing, I'm probably feeling pretty good about that game. So I do think it's underrated, and I probably want to keep it. I think it might even be better for new players just because the surprise factor, you can just win games you wouldn't otherwise win. So